Now that we have some idea about the philosophies underlying American government, let's take a look at the historical origins of the American government. One really important fact to keep in mind is that the English colonists, that's us, largely acted independently of England. That's because England was really far away. By the time England knew what was going on in the colonies, oftentimes weeks had passed and their responses were very slow. Regardless, as Britain tightens and controls and taxes the colonists begin to become very angry at this, and this leads us into the American Revolution. Keep in mind, the Revolution is not fought for all of the reasons that we're always told that it was fought. It was not just to get our freedom, but rather it was to liberate us from the control of a foreign government. There was an America before America was a country. The American people had started to form and consider themselves separate, and then they led the revolution. Also keep in mind, the revolution was not primarily organized by common people. Rather, the revolution was organized by wealthy land-holding men who, for some part, simply did not want to pay their taxes to Britain, and then they wanted to run their own affairs. And this is what leads us to the revolution. So in 1776, the Continental Congress, which was a group of revolutionary leaders in the colonies, passed what we call the Declaration of Independence. This is a letter from us to the King of England, King George III, telling him we are tired of being British subjects. We list out all of the grievances that we have against him and the British Crown and the British government, and then we formally say we are our own country. This is one of the first times in the history of the world that one group has just written a letter and said, hey, we're out. And now the war is on. Keep in mind, most of this document was written by Thomas Jefferson, who was one of the more radical of our founding fathers. One of Jefferson's most famous quotes goes as follows: "The tree of liberty must at times be watered with the blood of martyrs and tyrants alike." That's good stuff, isn't it? Jefferson was very much into armed revolution, and the French Revolution that came after the American Revolution took some of the ideas of Jefferson as its foundation, thus providing us with an even closer link to France. The Declaration, like I said, explains the reasons that the colonies felt they had to break away from England. Beyond this, though, it is a statement of our ideals as a people. The Declaration is a statement of what we believe in as a government and as a nation. It explains that the purpose of government is to protect human rights. This is a first in the world. We said we will be establishing a government, and the sole purpose of this government is to make every person have a great life. It's important stuff. And that's why America does remain an exceptional nation in a number of ways. Some of those ways are because of our founding ideals. So, please pause the video at this point and answer the following question in, of course, no fewer than 5 sentences. The Declaration of Independence states, quote, "All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." What does that mean? Is it true? Give me 5 sentences on that topic. Go ahead and pause this video and let's have 5 sentences right there. So, Declaration of Independence is written, war is fought. The Revolutionary War is a fascinating time in history, but not going to be covered in this presentation. The Continental Congress then meets to draw up a plan of government. Their first plan was not very good. It was called the Articles of Confederation. You might not have heard of the Articles of Confederation because it didn't last very long. Under the Articles, every state had equal power, and there was a very weak federal government. For example, each state had the power to coin its own money, build its own roads, collect taxes on its own. This was not a very good idea because in the 13 colonies, there quickly became 13 different currencies. So a Massachusetts dollar was not equal to a Pennsylvania dollar, which was not equal to a Georgia dollar. This made it very hard to do business. The states built roads, but they built roads that didn't match up. So there's a very famous road that goes between Vermont to New Hampshire. It goes from Vermont, and then it just kind of ends. And the New Hampshire government picked it up somewhere else and built their road. So you have roads that end kind of nowhere. It was a poorly run government. We did it though to avoid the idea and to avoid the fear that we would have a very strong, overly strong federal government led by one person who would be too similar to a king. The federal government was completely unable to rein in the power of the states. This is most clearly exemplified by an incident known as Shays' Rebellion. Daniel Shay was a farmer, and he had gotten land after the Revolutionary War. He was a veteran of the war. Well, when he couldn't pay the mortgage on his farm, the banks started to come around and foreclose on the farms. So Shay thought this was unbelievable. He said, here are Revolutionary War veterans, heroes of the Revolution. Who are these banks to come out here and try to collect on this debt and throw people off of the land that these men had fought and many had died to protect? So Shay leads a rebellion across the countryside, and no one is able to stop him. These state governments are unable to stop him. The federal government is unable to stop him. He goes from village to village, town to town, burning banks, killing bankers, killing federal officials. Eventually, a state army, Massachusetts, raises a militia and sends them out to stop Shay. Shay is then captured and hung with some of his other conspirators, and the rebellion is stopped. But this shows that the federal government needed to be more powerful. Question: is it possible in today's America that the government would be unable to stop a rebellion? So if somebody in, let's say, Ohio decided, hey, I want to rebel against the government, and I'm just going to I'm going to declare Cleveland its own country, and we're going to have our own army and everything, would the government of America be able to stop that? And is this good or bad? Should the federal government be so powerful that if anyone tried to rebel, they could stop them? Pause the video here, take a moment, and answer that question. So in 1787, every state sent a delegate, delegate's just a fancy name for a representative, to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. They could see the writing on the wall. Shays' Rebellion, amongst other activities that had shown the weakness of the federal system under the Articles of Confederation, demonstrated the need for a new plan. These men that came together in the summer of 1787 became known as the framers of the Constitution. The most important framer, indeed the man credited as the father of the Constitution, was this diminutive fellow right here named James Madison. Madison will later go on to become president. He was a brilliant statesman. He was, in American history, one of the smartest men who has ever held the office of president, and his influence is felt throughout our system of government. The framers wanted to make sure that the states kept some power. They still did not want a massively strong federal government, but they knew they had to empower the federal government to some degree. So they decided that they would create a federal system where power was divided between the state and national level. Throughout this presentation and throughout this course, you should know that when I talk about the national government, I could substitute in the phrase federal government. Federal and national here roughly mean the same thing. The Constitutional Convention involved a number of enormous debates, and I'm sure you would anticipate this. You're trying to create an entire system of government. People are going to disagree with each other. But at every disagreement, there were compromises. And as these compromises were made, the Constitution as a document became this living thing, this thing that was able to adapt to the realities of the political climate of 1787, and it has shown its resilience in maintaining our government all the way through to the present day. Now, one of the major issues had to deal with representation in Congress. Small states, and by small I mean small geographical states, such as New Jersey, wanted every state to have equal representation. They said if you gave the bigger states more say in the Congress, then no one would ever have to listen to the smaller states, and that was unfair. However, larger states, such as Virginia, said, well, of course we should have more of a say. We have more people. This is a democracy, so more people should have more of an important thing, more of an important voice over smaller states. So, in what is known as the Connecticut Compromise, sometimes called the Great Compromise, we craft our current system of legislative power, where we have what's called a bicameral legislature, with elements of both the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan present. In the Great Compromise, small states and large states are represented equally in one house of the Congress. That house is obviously the Senate, where every state has 2 and only 2 senators. However, in a nod to the Virginia plan, we also crafted a House of Representatives, where states would be given a number of seats in the House of Representatives proportional to that state's population. So, if you're a large state like Virginia, you're going to have a lot more representatives than a small state like New Jersey or Connecticut would have in the House of Representatives. Both houses of Congress are needed to pass laws. Hence, in the Great Compromise, America creates a system whereby all states are equal, but states with more people still have somewhat greater of a say in the day-to-day affairs of the country. Furthermore, there was a major debate about slavery. Now, 1787 is roughly 70 years before the outbreak of the Civil War. Everyone knew that slavery would be an issue that would divide the country. And it started at the Constitutional Convention. The southern states wanted slaves to be counted as people in the new government. And this is not because the southern states viewed slaves as people, but rather, if the southern states could get the slaves to be treated and viewed as people, they would have way more representatives in the House of Representatives. The northern states disagreed with this because they said that if you give the southern states the power to count slaves for purposes of taxation and representation, then that would give the southern states too much power. And if you give the southern states too much power, then the institution of slavery will go on and on, because the Congress would protect slavery for decades and decades to come, simply because the southern states have so many slaves that they're counting as individuals in terms of proportional representation in the legislature. So, in something known as the 3/5 Compromise, the Continental Congress agreed that only 3 out of 5 of the enslaved population would be counted for purposes of taxation and representation. Now, Many people looked at this and said this is a symbolic act. And from the very beginning of the country, the government, which was dominated by whites, was only counting an African slave as 60% of a person. 3/5 is 60%. However, you need to take a balanced look at this. If we had counted every slave as an individual, then it would have been likely that the southern states would have dominated the House of Representatives. And in their dominance of the House of Representatives, the institution of slavery would have continued on and on and on, and perhaps the Civil War would have been delayed or prevented entirely. So in the 3/5 compromise, only 3 out of 5 of the enslaved population were counted, and this allowed the southern states, this allowed the northern states to rein in the power of the South. Question. Now, please answer this question in no fewer than 5 sentences. This is a really serious topic. Think about slavery. And then think about what you've read in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Answer this question. In what ways did slavery go against the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution? Furthermore, which Enlightenment thinkers would have most strongly disagreed with the concept of slavery? Think back to your Enlightenment thinkers, pause the video, answer this question, and then when you're ready, move on to the next set of notes. Moving right along. Now, as these compromises are worked out, the framers of the Constitution build the Constitution as we know it. The people that were in favor of the Constitution being ratified were known as Federalists. Now, amongst these Federalists were many of our most famous founding fathers. However, there was another group of our founding fathers that disagreed. They said the Constitution was not strong enough because it did not protect the rights of citizens. The Constitution, as it was written, is really just a plan for government. Nowhere inside the Constitution does it say what the rights of the people shall be. So a group of men known as anti-federalists supported the notion of the addition of amendments to the Constitution that would guarantee the rights of the people. And after these two sides squared off, there was a national debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists about what the Constitution should ultimately be and what protections for the people should be included. The Federalists wrote a series of papers arguing why the Constitution should be ratified. These papers, these essays, were called the Federalist Papers, and they were published in newspapers and pamphlets across the country. Now, our most famous founding fathers, namely James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton, they wrote under a code name. They wrote under an alias. And their alias was Publius. Publius in Latin means the people. So these men were taking on the voice of the people as they argued for the ratification of the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists wrote papers in response to the Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were primarily concerned with this notion that this new federal government was not restricted enough. The rights of the people were not ensconced solidly enough inside of this Constitution. So they argued with the Federalists. Now, the arguments of the Anti-Federalists eventually lead to the creation of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is what we get to in our next learning objective, so I won't go into it in too much depth here. However, please keep in mind, most of the fundamental freedoms that you hold dear as Americans are there because the Anti-Federalists argued for them. Right to freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, the protection against unreasonable search and seizure. These protections were inserted into the Constitution through the arguments of the Anti-Federalists. The Bill of Rights is our first 10 amendments. It was added to the original Constitution based on the arguments of the Anti-Federalists, and in so doing, it secured the votes needed for ratifying the Constitution, and this is what finally allows the Constitution to be ratified by the states and to be put into power. By 1789, the new Constitution was ratified and the American government begins to operate. And then from 1789 onward, we have added to the Constitution, but we have not altered its fundamental structure. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Question: what did the Federalists believe? What did the Anti-Federalists believe? And which side won the debate? I mean, ultimately, who won? Take a moment, answer that question. When you're ready, go ahead and move on to the next video.